السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So I'm very humbled to be here tonight. I want to thank Brother Daniel and I want to thank Ammar and Ali for the invitation, even though it was last minute. It is an honor to be sitting next to someone whose work I personally very much admire. My purpose here today is to offer a viewpoint and hopefully a tool for analyzing the issue at hand, which is feminism as it pertains to the Muslim Ummah. And given that obviously time is very limited, and given the fact that the topic of feminism is a very deep and large one, there's no way that anything I have to say can be a full account. So although my arguments and my positions today are going to be simplified for the reasons I just mentioned, they're not, I hope, misrepresentative of the critiques that I and many other Muslims share. And please understand that I'm not speaking from the perspective of a scholar, academic, or otherwise, so just keep that in the back of your mind. I have one disclaimer, which is that we're going to assume that everyone here is not going through a faith crisis and that we are practicing Muslims and that we have accepted the word of Allah. And as I share my opinions and my viewpoints, you'll see why that's an important disclaimer. So the other thing is what we're not going to be talking about. Because oftentimes when the topic of feminism comes up, the counter arguments that I get from my fellow Muslimas are about things outside of what concerns us as Muslim women. And so what we're not going to talk about is women the world over. We're not talking about women across the globe and outside of Islam. And the reason we need to clarify this point is because as Muslim women, we take the divine revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as our guiding post. It's our ideology that we subscribe to. And so that's our starting point. And that changes things because you can't assume that non-Muslim women share the same viewpoint as you. And that completely makes everything that comes after that very difficult and very confusing, and you're not going to be aligned. The other thing we're not going to talk about are the injustices that absolutely do exist within the Muslim Ummah. And Daniel alluded to this. Do women face injustice within our Ummah? Of course. Women everywhere do. And the question is that injustice systemic? I would say that if we're going to argue that the injustices that some Muslim women face, then what we're arguing is that that injustice is due to Islam. Because that's our prevailing ideology, that's how we operate, that's our starting point. But in point of fact, the injustices that some Muslim women face are a result of men neglecting Islam, not men actually following Islam. The last thing we're not going to talk about is the argument that, well, since I, as a critic of feminism, am acknowledging that injustice does occur, why am I not rallying for feminism as a solution? Even if it's one woman who's facing injustice, isn't feminism the answer to liberating her and giving her her rights? Well, this is a logical fallacy. It's a logical fallacy to state that because many Muslim women face injustices, therefore feminism is the solution, right? And this logical fallacy is known as a false alternative. You're assuming that that is the only possibility or the only solution to a problem that we're both acknowledging without considering any other possibilities. I want to make clear that to be critical of feminism is not an automatic denial of the existence of injustice, and I know Daniel said this, I just want to reiterate it. So to be critical of feminism, whether you're a man or a woman, is to reject feminism as a solution for the injustices that we acknowledge do exist. So it's to say that, yes, there is a problem, but I, as a critic of feminism, don't agree with your solution to that problem. So now that I've gotten the disclaimers kind of out of the way, I just want to give you a little bit more background about where I'm coming from. As I mentioned, I'm not a scholar. My background is in education and in English. I love language, and I love analyzing rhetoric and diving deeply into the art and the science of rhetoric, especially when we're looking at it over history and over time. Oftentimes we think of rhetoric as having the connotation of persuasion or deception, but actually rhetoric is just referring to any kinds of communication that people have with one another. That could be through speech, it could be verbal, it could be articles, it could be advertisements, the news. When the guys go to the girl's wali and try to convince him, that's all rhetoric. You name it, it's rhetoric. So, speaking of rhetoric, at last night's talk, there was a gentleman with a sign that read, "How dare you presume to know what's best for women?" Is he here? Darn. It would have just been nice to speak to him, directly. I wonder though, do I get a free pass then as a woman to speak on behalf of all women? If not him, do I get to do it? I wonder if this gentleman were here tonight, I would love to have said to him, "How dare you presume to silence a worldview that I, as a woman, agree with? Who are you, sir, to presume that all women agree with your derision of his claims?" What he did in that poster was he stated an erroneous argument, right? And this is an ad hominem fallacy, as I'm sure many of you probably noted. And an ad hominem fallacy or argument is one that goes after a person and not the problem or the argument itself. So it's an attack on the speaker or the rhetoric. And I'm going to spend much of my time this evening talking about the error in reasoning, not from a conceptual standpoint, which Daniel did, but from a rhetorical standpoint, because that's my training, that's my background. So as much as I tried not to, I couldn't help myself, and I decided at the last minute to include a brief hadith, because it's on my mind constantly. And it just craves rhetorical analysis at the same time. And the hadith excerpt is, "Islam began as something strange, and it will revert to being strange as it began." So the term strange is interpreted in this context to mean referring to small numbers of adherents, right? And so the term adhere itself means to bond with tremendous force to something, to be unwavering in your commitment to stick to something. How many of us today can honestly say that we haven't doubted or questioned our deen or aspects of our deen at one point in time? I'm sure that we all have at some point. And with the number of juvenile millennials, and I'm a millennial, so don't be offended, that are cowering to the clutch of feminism today, it's easy to be reminded of this hadith. And make no mistake, feminism is in competition with Islam. Feminism can and it is making Islam strange again. An ideology is defined as a system of ideals and ideas, especially one that forms the basis of economic or political theory and policy. And as Daniel just spoke at length, we can understand that with this definition, feminism is also an ideology. Ideologies are human constructs. Islam, again, as practicing Muslims, we do not believe that Islam and the divine revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a human construct. We accept it as divine revelation. So anything that is a human construct is up for criticism and is therefore fallible. And it only takes the test of time for that to occur. And I would argue that any ideology which lays claim to eradicating any sort of social justice is in some way or form trying to offer an alternative to Islamic doctrine. So I'll say that again. Any ideology which claims to eradicate social injustice is in some way or form attempting to offer an alternative to Islamic doctrine. It's saying, I'm a solution to this problem. If we accept Allah as our creator, Muhammad as our prophet, and Islam as our deen, we submit to Islam wholly, and we do not accept the idea that another ideology can enhance, refine, improve upon, or replace Islam. We accept that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to us in the Quran is perfect and timeless. We accept that our prophet, peace be upon him, was a living example of human perfection. We accept, we submit, without doubt and without compromise. And for those who argue in favor of feminism as a solution to the injustices that some women in the Ummah face, if we truly want to end injustice, then it behooves us not to try to reform Islam, but rather to return to Islam.